Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webcast. I'm Alexandra Pisatsky, telecom reporter with the Globe and Mail, and I'm pleased to be your moderator today. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the Globe and Mail headquarters is located on the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Métis Nation, and the Mississaugas of the Creda First Nation. Families of significant wealth have unique needs, and building a customized plan that accounts for family dynamics can help to mitigate risk. Today, we have a group of experts joining us to discuss how family-owned businesses can build strategies that preserve, scale, and manage family wealth while simultaneously growing the family business. During the last 10 minutes of the panel, we will be answering audience questions. If you have any questions for our panelists, please type them in the virtual Q&A box. On behalf of the Globe and Mail, I would like to recognize Richter for supporting today's event. Now let's get started. Joining me today, we have Richard LeBlanc, Professor of Governance, Law and Ethics at York University, Tasso Lagios, CPA and Managing Partner at Richter, Naeem Ali, CEO of SM2 Capital Partners, and Heidi Wong, Corporate Counsel at Osler. Thank you all for joining me today. Now let's get started. So to kick things off, can each of you tell us a bit about what you do as it relates to today's topic? And maybe we'll start with Richard.
Sure. Thanks, Alexandra. My name is Richard LeBlanc, and I'm a governance professor at York University. I also help boards of directors. In the last 20 years, I've helped 15 family boards. 7 have been public and 8 have been private. The public boards is normally independent directors that want to ratchet up their governance when they're on a family board. And the private boards are either a forward-looking founder or angel or investor capital that has come onto the board and wants to prepare for an exit.
Perfect. And over to Tasso.
So I'm the managing partner of Richter, which is really what we call a business family office. We help clients around their business needs. And also what we realized over time is families needed assistance around their assets outside the business, and in many cases, the dynamics around the family itself. So we built this business family office, 2 platforms. And what I do is I play at the intersection of those 2 areas around the business and the family, and trying to help them navigate the complexity, but also the opportunity around those 2 areas of both business and family needs.
Thank you so much. And Heidi Wong.
Yes, hi. I'm a corporate lawyer at Osler, where my practice focuses primarily in the areas of mergers and acquisitions, corporate finance, as well as corporate governance. And where today's topic usually sort of arises in the course of my practices, where I advise clients in relation to transactional matters, for instance, acting for acquirers or investors in privately held companies like family businesses, as well as issues that private companies deal with in the course of managing and operating their businesses and dealing with their shareholders.
Perfect. Thank you. And over to Naeem.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on the panel. My name is Naeem Ali. I am the CEO of SM2 Capital. We are a private family business, primarily operating in the hospitality space. We own assets such as parking lots, car rental companies like Budget Rent-A-Car, hotels, casinos, and we have a startup insurance company. The firm was founded by my incredible father and my incredible uncle approximately 45 years ago. My next generation, or our next generation, is led by myself as the CEO, my brother as the chief investment officer, my first cousin as the chief operating officer, and our CFO is married to a shareholder, and he's effectively a brother-in-law, what have you. So the 4 of us comprise the executive management team to oversee the operating businesses. Simultaneously, we are looking at how we run a family office. So for today's discussion, we really are a family that's overseeing and trying to figure out our strategy as we look forward with respect to how our capital gets allocated both operationally and investment-wise over the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Thank you for that. And Naeem, while you have the floor, maybe you could answer the first question, which is how have ownership responsibilities changed from the previous generation's experience?
Yeah, great question. So I'll say my father was an engineer in the early 70s. He had just immigrated to this great country. He rented a car from Budget Rent a Car in Stewart, BC, and was driving out east. The car, him and my mom ended up in Calgary, Alberta, where we are based now, and the car had ball tires on it. So he went into a Budget Rent a Car location and to change the car or change the tires. Subsequently, he had a random conversation with the then owner of the franchise and proceeded then, shortly thereafter, to buy the franchise on the spot. He called his brother and my grandfather, his father, in East Africa and said, I just bought the Budget Rent a Car franchise for Alberta. Please come here. Those two had never seen snow. They got on a plane and they flew to Alberta and they built their homes in Calgary, Alberta. And for the next 3 years, the three of them worked rental car counters, washed cars, and did everything related to operating a business. I tell that story first because to understand my story, you have to see the operational experience that the founders, who are incredible entrepreneurs, started these companies. All our companies, my father and my uncle worked at every single position. Myself, though, as I joined the company, we have to look at an established base. We've created a senior leadership. We've built out culture. We now have almost 500 people working for us. That doesn't necessarily mean that I can be the one going out to wash cars or drive cars or clean hotel rooms or deal cards. We have an incredible senior leadership. So ownership responsibilities have changed more in the next generation as asking questions about the strategic direction of our companies and the strategic direction of our family.
Thank you. And I have a question now for all of the panelists, which is what challenges can having a board help businesses navigate? And maybe Richard could start us off there.
Sure. Thanks, Alexandra. 4 areas. First is succession. The number one job of any board is to hire, fire, and pay the CEO. And that decision has got the greatest effect on corporate performance. Number 2 is dynamics. There are dynamics in a boardroom, and then there are family dynamics, which are a whole different kettle of fish. And number 3 is what I call self-interest, conflicts of interest, related party transactions, expenses, compensation. A board can bring some discipline and conditions and rigor to that. And the last one is what I call a family plan. What are the conditions for working in the company? What are the conditions for owning shares in the company? What are the conditions for participating in management? And what are the conditions for serving on the board? So making all of those explicit is something that a board can bring some rigor to a family business.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Over to you, Tasso.
Yeah, I guess the family, especially in a private company context, right? It's kind of a new area that a lot of families are starting to pursue, trying to understand how does, why consider a board? How can they help us? I think entrepreneurs like the flexibility of not being accountable to a board, but I think what they've realized is that a board can bring a certain level of structure around them and hold them to some degree accountable. As Richard said, there's a lot of stakeholders in a private business. There's the internal stakeholders, the external stakeholders, and the extended family stakeholders. So the board can kind of bring some level of discipline around that, and things are changing. You have second-gen, third-generation companies having both interest to be in the business, to run the business, or just be shareholders, or just be married to shareholders. And that creates a different dynamic that will help navigate through that and hopefully allow for long-term success for the family around the business.
Mm-hmm. And Heidi, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what challenges boards can help
When
with.
I think about directors and sort of the role that they occupy and really, at a high level, they are the ultimate stewards of the business and, of the corporation. And I think really having a strong board, can help, in the sense of providing, external, to the extent you have folks that aren't within the family on the board, providing external perspective and really there to provide against, and thinking through, again, also strategic perspectives and looking and evaluating, both opportunities and challenges that, someone who is involved in the day-to-day management, may not, be able to see the, the larger forest, having been sort of in the trees for, the bulk of their day-to-day involvement in the business.
Mm-hmm. And Naeem?
Yeah, I think the panelists have given some great tactical advice and some tactical oversight on this question. And practically speaking, family businesses, and I can speak from my experience, is that more often than not, at least before we intentionally carved out space to talk about the issues that all the great issues that the panelists have referenced, a board meeting was at the dinner table, right? Every Sunday, or maybe at every single dinner, if you're in a family business growing up. And that just does not become a conducive place to really hash out things. We had to be very intentional about board meetings and even intentional about setting the agenda for those board meetings, because generational shifts and challenges in our family. We have two extremely strong, powerful shareholder women who are my cousins who are not involved in the business. Now, one day there was a plan that they wanted to be involved. When they asserted their own agency and said, we don't want to be involved, we wanted to figure out how we can support them. So the board could have discussions around there, succession planning as well. We don't often get to have conversations about succession planning when we're dealing with revenues and expenses and net operating income on a day-to-day basis or a month-to-base basis, but we needed to carve out intentional space to set a clear agenda and define that agenda for the board of directors, which was outside of the operating companies.
Mm-hmm. So what's a good way to get started? How can a business sort of dip its toes into the waters of governance? And this is a question that all of the panelists can weigh in on as well.
So maybe I can just say a few words and then kind of pass it to someone else. Look, it's important that you kind of, first of all, consult with someone that has some level of experience in this area, because some people try to do it on their own and really don't know how to, what type of people do I need around the table? How do I assess performance? What type of content should we have at the board level? How often should we meet? How do you evaluate the board? And it's so all these areas need to be considered. So I think it's number one is reaching out to someone that's had a level of expertise in this area and start the dialogue. Sometimes it takes time and it takes time to get comfortable. So beginning that dialogue is only the start. I've started with some clients, historically, even today with some about a year ago, and they're still kind of navigating through that. So start by reaching out to someone.
Richard.
I want to pick up on what Ali said about the kitchen table conversation and what Tasso said, what Naeem said about the kitchen table conversation, and what Tasso said about, getting good advice. And what I say is start an advisory board. Sometimes a board is like kryptonite to a founder, because a board can fire a founder. And we saw that with Gildan about a month ago. So governance is baby steps. Start with an advisory board, see how the founder likes it. Start with observer status. Bring people into the meetings where they don't have a vote. Start with committee representation, but you're not a director. Start with bringing on one independent director who the founder respects. So it doesn't have to be cliff vesting. You can start small and get the founder comfortable. Statistics for family businesses are not that good. There's a 60% chance your family business will not last to the second generation. Third and fourth is 87% and 97% failure rates. So what Naeem and Tasso and Heidi are talking about is creating a structure that really helps discipline and have tough conversations, so that your family business cannot be one of the statistics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and
which
just stark numbers.
Thank you. And I was just to say, maybe just even before going through all of this, sitting down and Naeem, sort of what you've kind of mentioned about your family was sitting down and thinking about what you want and what you want to achieve, and who gets to participate in decision making, who gets to participate in ownership and control, and what are the commitment of other family members as your family gets larger and goes beyond the first generation, the second generation, and now your kids, the third generation. What are the commitment of different family levels to the business, and how does that translate into how you want to set things up for for the future, and looking at what that means in terms of both family members that want to stay in the business and maybe family members that don't.
Yeah, I think all really, great points. And governance can be a scary word, but ultimately it's just a framework for decision making, and that is just so vital in families to having those, as you said, Dr. Richard, those difficult conversations and having an intentional space to do that. I will tell you, I joined the firm as in-house counsel, and for the first 5 years, it was really stressful as I did everything the founders wanted me to do and really didn't get to, talk about where I saw the business going or strategy or what were my strengths that besides the legal strengths that the founders could tap, what was going to be my career if I was going to stay here for 10 years. And I would say I felt very isolated and alone, during this time. And in 2015, I happened to stumbled into Family Enterprise Canada Symposium where other families we're talking about private families, right? We're talking about what was going on with them. And irrespective of the number of zeros behind such businesses, many people had very similar problems like I did. I didn't know how to have conversations with my founders, and I didn't know how to talk about governance. And so I would say, this communication, conversation, we were fortunate to be able to use advisors to help us who are FEA designated. That was significantly improved. I mean, my founders were like, why are we going into a room on our first shareholder meeting or first family council? Why are we going to be sitting in this room for 8 hours talking about soft things, right? My founders are entrepreneurs, just care about, NOI and what's going on in the businesses. But when we all came together, the 7 of us, and had this kind of foundational conversation, it really set the tone for us to have good governance, which is really a place to make decisions intentionally and have intentional conversations.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question for Tasso, and it is about what it means to take a holistic approach to family governance.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say the best way to describe it is, and we've heard a little bit from Naeem in his story, is that a family business is like an ecosystem, and it's got a lot of stakeholders. It's got sort of business stakeholders. So you have, employees and customers, and you have a lot going on at the business level, but you have a lot going on outside the business as well. And you've got shareholders, you've got family members. It's somewhat unique than, public or government or private equity owned companies. So because of that ecosystem, I think you need people who can understand all those elements of a family business. You can't stay just, kind of closed to the business itself. You need some people who can play a role and understand the family ecosystem, the shareholders, what are they trying to achieve, and families are typically less concerned about quarterly results and less concerned about 5-year results as private equities may. They're kind of thinking generationally in many instances. What does this business mean to us? How do we want to grow it? Do we want to bring in professional management? Do we want to have succession to the next gen, or do we want to monetize all or a portion of it? So these are the kinds of things that requires a holistic thinker, requires someone who kind of can think broad and just not narrow as it relates to the business. So that's the best way I can describe holistic thinking at a governance level.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So obviously succession has come up a few times, as have, family dynamics. Many of us have seen the show Succession. Obviously, some of the things that go down in that show are things that business owners would likely wish to avoid. So here's a question for our panel. How do you manage family dynamics so that they don't wind up harming the business? And maybe Naeem could kick us off there.
Sure. For me, I mean, I was feeling it in those first 5 years, in which I kind of think about as that first bucket of my journey. And I was feeling the friction points, both amongst my executive management team, both amongst with my founders, and just, simple things like letting that fester and that resentment really just, if I was going to be a part of this family and this part of this business, I really needed to get everybody in a room together and start having some open, honest conversation. So if I had not done that, I don't believe, we would have progressed in terms of the evolution of our family, in terms of the next generation getting decision-making power, because I can, I can, I feel, many of my colleagues in this space, when they've done exceptional things in their life, whether it's educationally or professionally, and they come to their family business. And of course, I mean, their boss is also someone that changed their diapers. So, getting out of that whole dynamic, and having a really strong relationship, because the business can also strengthen the family bonds. It is not necessarily the source of the family bonds, but managing family dynamics just requires very intentional conversation and communication. And I would also add having advisors in the room if you can, because none of my shareholders want to always walk into a meeting where I've set the agenda. That doesn't really, there's questions around that. And also, I don't get to participate. So when we bring in our FEA advisors, they've been phenomenal in making sure everybody feels seen and heard. And that's helped us, navigate family dynamics so that we can focus on the business and not on conflict within ourselves.
Richard, what do you think?
Well, it's in the movie Succession, Logan said to the 4 children, I love all of you, but you are not serious people. And none of the 4 kids got the CEO position. And each of the 4 had a fatal flaw. So Tasso has mentioned independent directors. Naeem has mentioned independent advisors. And and Heidi, you've mentioned talent development. This is really critical, is explicit talent development of the second generation using independent people. It could be a board, it could be advisors, it could be a family office, but someone that doesn't have a vested interest and takes steps to ensure that fatal flaws are dealt with and that all potential successors get the development that they need before the final appointment is made. And one more thing, ideally the appointment is made before the founder dies. When the founder passes away, the family dynamics become chaotic. So to the extent that you can have these, and I think, Naeem, you mentioned these purposeful conversations, that is just critical.
Yeah, like did Logan underline Kendall's name or did he cross it out? We don't know because he's dead, so we can't ask. Yeah. Heidi, your thoughts on family dynamics?
Yeah, so, listening to this conversation and, it's great to have the conversation, but, the lawyer in me wants to say, great to have these conversations, but we need to memorialize this somewhere, at a point in time where, people are still talking to one another. And, whether that's in the form of a shareholders agreement or, board policies or charters that, people agree are, this is how we're going to conduct ourselves in this business. And this is what, how we're going to deal with things if, we ever get into a fight. And the time to do that is not sort of, when you're about to have a dispute. You do that sort of on the front end, when people are still talking to one another and are willing to listen to reason and, and there's a balanced conversation around that room, and with advisors that can help, frame that for them.
Great advice. Yeah. And Tasso.
Yeah, sure. Look, although the area is somewhat, complex, I think you can address it through good forums for communication. And, people sometimes ask me, how do you build trust? It's through having these types of structures that you could be transparent, communicative, find the ability to do so. And I think Naeem and Richard both mentioned this, is having an outside person changes the dynamic. About a few weeks ago, I was asked to attend a meeting between a father and a son. And the purpose of the meeting was to talk about the next gen. And although the relationship between father and son was amazing, they felt just my presence there would make a difference on that communication. It wouldn't make it about a father-son having it, but it was about succession, having proper succession and having that dialogue in a more kind of professional way, if I may call it. It does change the dynamic.
So I have a question for Richard specifically, and it's about going public. A lot of families obviously choose to enact a dual class share structure company. And what I'm wondering is, how does one balance the needs of various stakeholders in that sort of arrangement?
Well, it's incredibly difficult. And when I look at this, I ask directors, independent directors, I say, talk to me. And they tell me, Richard, it's the founder's way or the highway. And I owe my directorship to the founder. And if you're, and I'm going to use my words now, if you're the mouthpiece for the founder, you're not fulfilling your fiduciary duty. Your fiduciary duty, and this applies whether you're on a private company board or a public company, and I see my fellow panelists are nodding, is to act with a view to the best interests of the corporation. And that includes all stakeholders with primacy to none. So acting, simply as the advocate of a significant shareholder or someone, and it's really hard because you're sitting across from the boardroom table. So it's important to exercise independence of mind as a director, whether you're on a private company board or a public company board. That is very tough to do, Alexandra.
I can only imagine. I also am curious about talent retention, because obviously, if you're not a public company, then you don't have the option to offer your management team shares as an incentive. So this is a question for Heidi, but I'm wondering, what are some strategies for talent retention when you're in that situation, you're private, you don't have shares to offer?
So, again, I think this goes back to some of the things we've been chatting about. And so it really comes back to a decision around, ultimately at the end of the day, around ownership structure and control. And, again, if you're in a company, are you, willing to entertain non-family members, having a stake, in the form of equity ownership in your business, and yeah, if yes, then, is that in the form of either, voting stock or non-voting stock? If, equity ownership is completely out of the picture, and, are there other ways that you may sort of want to, look to other tools that sort of provide that type of upside to, potential employees, senior management members, people outside the family that you're interested in attracting and retaining? Because, the reality is that for, family businesses and private businesses that are seeking to grow, they're competing with other businesses out there, some of them public, some of them private, that may have sort of, the flexibility to offer sort of more, that have the ability to offer things that are attractive to employees, like stock options and the like. And so, sometimes what we see in, the private context is, the use of things like what we call phantom awards, which are, most typically things like, stock appreciation rights or restricted share units that have equity-like features that, aren't really equity in the true sense, but, provide, senior level employees or, other employees that the company wants to attract and retain in a way that, gives these people, the compensation packages that are comparable to their external competitors.
And
I'm going to jump in there for a moment and just add something to what Heidi just said, is that's a big area that a lot of private family-owned businesses are quite concerned about, is attraction, retention, and even alignment of key people in the organization. Long-term incentive plans are becoming a big area that a lot of families are saying, okay, I hear about this, but I have no stock to offer them. How can I structure things? And I think this is where I'll kind of tie it into what a board's responsibility would be, is to push the company to come out with a plan or a path forward, whatever you would like to call it. And that plan can then be tied into some of these long-term incentive plans to make sure that everyone is rowing in the same direction. So the question is kind of very prevalent to kind of today's environment, where attraction, retention, and even alignment is an important element.
I want to get back to this idea of independent directors that Richard was touching on, and anyone feel free to jump in here. But how can independent directors fulfill their roles properly amid what can sometimes be complex family dynamics?
Well, maybe I'll kick it off. you want to, directors have told me I have to be a priest, a psychologist, a psychiatrist. Family dynamics are very, very deep and complex. And I think once as an independent director, if you have the ear of the founder, sometimes a founder can have blind sides and be easily susceptible to children and to manipulation and emotion. You want to not be part of the fray. You want to not take sides. You want to be a referee. You want to be independent. You want to be wise counsel as an independent director. That, I think, is the most valuable thing an independent director can add.
I would echo the same in our family too, as mentioned earlier, bringing in independent advisors even to set agendas, to start listening to everybody. An independent person, really engages and brings all the family along for the ride, and talks to them, and then can flush out issues, not just business issues, but family and relationship issues, and bring those out in the boardroom, so to speak. And absolutely agree with you, Dr. Richard, in terms of a priest, a mediator, a facilitator. They've been vital in our boardroom, keeping the family together and forcing us to have conversations that some of us, myself, that I was afraid to talk about in that room. So that independence has been helpful. I would definitely say on our part, we haven't engaged independent directors officially, and that's something that our executive management team talks about probably on a quarterly basis, and that is a failing on our part to bring in, especially the sectors that we're in. Independent directors can offer so much more expertise in a certain sector than and give us insight and show us our blind spots. So that's definitely on our radar, and we hope to engage with something like that soon.
Yeah, I think that's, Naeem, reacting to that, I think that's fair, which is, when you sort of look to, look for qualified directors, you want sort of both individuals that complement the existing expertise on your family, but also to cover off spots that you may not have particular expertise in, or, that you think are things that, that the family and business might be interested in. If you think you're going to be looking at projects or things that require a lot of capital outlay or that are going to be capital intensive, but you don't have financing or, that type of expertise within the family, because, again, you are an entrepreneur first and foremost, and you may not have that expertise. You may want to look for someone that complements, what's already there and can build out some of those strengths.
Yeah, just the closing words on that question. I would say I've never been kind of asked as many times as I have over the last number of years about sort of setting up a board, the complement of people, what kind of skill set should we have, and the topic of inside family members and outside board members comes up very often. I would say to you, I sit on quite a few boards, and I would say almost all of them are not the situations that I'm involved with have an outside member, at least one outside member that would assist. And the more comfortable the family gets on having outside members, the more they realize the value that they can bring. Again, kind of having that broader perspective, and also having experience from other boards as well, right? It's typically your board member that you would bring on board may be sitting on another board. Many times they'll turn to me and say, what are other families doing in this situation? Can you assist us? So that kind of context and outside perspective is very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Some of you have already kind of touched on this, but do panelists have any other advice on how to choose the right independent directors?
That's a good question, I would say. Yeah, go ahead, Richard.
Maybe I'll try that. You remember the Moneyball scene where it was just gut feeling, and then someone came in and said, listen, you got to apply a science to this. And I'll pick up on what Naeem and Heidi have said about competencies. Good boards now have competency matrices. So what skills do we need in an independent director? They also have behavioral matrices, and they have deep reference checks, and they have interviews. So it's a lot easier to get someone onto a board. But if you get the wrong person onto a board, I usually ask groups of people, I say, put up your hand if there's a jerk on your board. And about 90% of the hands go up. And to the 10% of the hands that don't go up, I say, guess what? If you don't know who the jerk is, it's a pretty good chance it's you. So there's always someone on a board that is that is not quite right. So behavioral checks and reference checks, and I tell directors, listen, if you don't know someone's negatives, you're not doing your homework. So exercise incredible care in bringing someone onto a board, even using recruitment firms. Spencer Stewart, Russell Reynolds, Korn Ferry, take it seriously. It's a big step to bring some, especially a family board. So take the recruitment aspect seriously, Alexandra.
Mm-hmm. And since you're on that question right now, one of the audience questions actually is, what are the pros and cons of having non-family members on the board? Do you want to take a stab at that as well?
Well, just briefly, I mean, the con is that they don't understand the family dynamics. It takes 2, 3, 4 years to understand who the players are. They may not understand the business. So that's the cons. The pro is that they are neutral arbitrators. They are facilitators. They are enablers. They can have a mature confidence. So I think, overall, the pros are more in favor of the cons, but it will take time for them to get up to speed on the industry and on the family dynamics.
One thing I would add, tailing on to Dr. Richard, is when we talk about selecting independent directors too, is the process, and although it's implied, but let's expressly say it, the process is really important. And by that, I mean, I would say a big inflection point for the next generation was when we started selecting our own advisors or the new advisors, whether it was the new lawyers, whether it was the new accountants or the new bankers, but they were selected by the next gen. How we did that, though, was to still engage the founders. I mean, I appreciate my father's 40-year-old corporate counsel, but does he really have a pulse on who the next gen is? Not as much as the colleagues that we're now engaging with ourselves. So from a process standpoint, bringing along the entire family, whether you're sharing or just sharing the steps or where you are in the process with respect to bringing on advisors or directors, but making sure that the entire family has the buy-in throughout the whole process. And our founders have been super supportive as they've seen their advisors or the firm's advisors, evolve to people that we relate with, that we connect with, and our relationships that are helping the firm.
I would also say that, the family probably has their own kind of relationships already. They typically will have, a lawyer they deal with, or a law firm, or an accounting firm, or a bank. They're bankers, and they can probably start by dialoguing with them. Do they know people? Sometimes some of these families default to their kind of retiring accountant, retiring lawyer, which is a good place to start. There's nothing wrong with knowing the company, knowing the family. Probably going beyond that is, as Richard mentioned, is kind of going to search firms, reaching out. The pool of talent in this area, although there are quite a few people, I mean, public boards are different than private family boards. The type of stuff that and the way these meetings are sometimes conducted, there are differences, and the skill set sometimes is different because of the family dynamics in the ecosystem, as I started early about saying. So it is they're not a dime a dozen, but when you find a good person that kind of has the knowledge about business knowledge, but also family enterprise knowledge, it's powerful to the family.
Yeah. Heidi, did you want to?
Yeah, I think, again, listening to everyone here, what strikes me is it's the importance of networks, both your, family network as well as your professional networks, and then reaching out to, industry groups or, not just, as you said, the family enterprise group, but, to the extent that there are, management groups for, companies that operate in the hotel industry, and sort of other sort of areas where professionals and other businesses in your area congregate, in terms of helping you establish external networks. These will be people that have encountered similar issues, at least within the industry, or at least industries that you're interested in potentially expanding to, and that can sort of provide some perspective, at least on sort of those business issues that would complement again sort of what the family might be looking at, sort of very internally.
Mm-hmm. So I have a few more questions for you guys, but there are so many audience questions and they are excellent. So I'm going to say let's move to the audience questions for now. I think people would love to get some answers to their questions here. So just to kick it off, one person asks, the term family office gets used a lot. I'd be curious to get the panel's definition of what a family office actually is and does. So maybe Naeem could take that one.
Sure. As someone that I would say we're at the ground zero of the family office space, how I distinguish it from the family business space per se is I'm the CEO of SM2 Capital. I need to talk to my teams about revenues, expenses, marketing, accounting departments. I'm running a business. Okay. Now, for us, those cash flows from the businesses, where do they go? My founders loved keeping it in the business, loved keeping their debt levels low, loved cycling it. And of course, that's how we grew. But simultaneously, there was some risk, right, with keeping that much capital in the business. So what the next generation did was we articulated, given the language right now that's predominantly going out there, is to build a family office. And the sole purpose of the family office is the preservation of wealth. So we don't invest in our companies. We diversify. We invest in public market securities. We invest in venture capital. We might buy crypto. My brother and I do like that. But it is designed to diversify away from the family, away from the businesses, and invest in things that are obviously asset allocation properly, but also our next generation might be interested in something different. So it gives them a little bit of a financial bank to invest in something that they might be interested in. I don't know what my kids are going to invest in, my kids 7 and 4, but in 20 years, what does the world look like for them? Potentially, they might be able to tap the family office to test out some of their ideas. So keep it, succinct here. Family business, you're having discussions about running a business, whereas in our family office, we are trying to preserve wealth. Estate planning comes into play. The various shareholder agreements and everything falls within insurance. All of those kind of things fall within the family office space. And also, it's also given us a little bit of something exciting. Venture capital, like I said, that excites my brother and I. So taking those type of meetings in the family office space keeps us engaged and allows us just not to be pure business people, but think about other things as well.
Mm-hmm. Great answer. There's a question here that's specifically for Heidi, and it is, what sorts of structures do owners put in place to prevent arguments from getting heated?
So I think here is, what I think about here along these lines is, to the extent you have multiple family members who might be shareholders, a structure would be something like a shareholders agreement. And you kind of work out amongst yourselves sort of, what are some of the key decisions that, we might have to make as a business and a company, what do we need in terms of a framework for making decisions with respect to those things? Are we going to need unanimity amongst, for some of those, very, very key decisions? Or, are we willing to accept maybe something a little bit less for, things that are still important, but, may not require unanimity? And it's really setting out and being very sort of, and thinking through sort of those decision points and sort of what approvals are required sort of in advance of, you having to being confronted with that decision and making that decision. Even things about, decisions around who gets to sit on the board and, what qualifications we might want from directors, outside of the, what's required under corporate statutes. What do we want in terms of officer appointments? To the extent that family members want to participate in the business, are there going to be, particular requirements or restrictions? And, really just thinking through that and documenting that in the form of an agreement so that, when the time comes, you have something to look to and, where you have negotiated amongst family members when, heads are cooler, that, there is something to look at and, really that is the agreement that you've struck. And how that will guide you in sort of helping you make decisions and within that framework.
Mm-hmm. And that's a great segue to the next question here, which is, how do you navigate in-laws entering the family business? The questioner writes, I'm open to it, but want to be aware of the common challenges that arise.
I have an in-law working in my family business. He is the CFO. And Look, I think it definitely warrants a lot of conversation so my CFO is the son-in-law, right, of my uncle. And so what we did in our family business, though, was he was able to work. My uncle didn't have the financial expertise. He did his time in big firm accounting before he joined us. And what we found was obviously giving him a mentor that was not his father-in-law, right? So he didn't have to work. He wasn't working directly with that. We also, again, had to really establish clear boundaries about when to talk about what and at what time. And really, when we're in a board meeting, we really try to wear the board of directors hats, right? When we're in a family council meeting, we again all, put on our family hats, and that's probably where the most animated conversation can happen. And likewise, when we're in a management meeting between the four of us, he's a brother-in-law. He's effective. I mean, he's a brother, but he's a brother-in-law. We really are wearing our executive management team hats and holding each other accountable for the roles and responsibilities that we agree to. So I think building the trust with him that we would respect the buckets or the hats that we have to wear and have those conversations at the appropriate time was really important. I can tell you at this time, we have shareholder meetings twice a year. At this time, spouses have not been invited to our shareholder meetings.
Mm.
So, and maybe I can just jump in and add to what Naeem just said, is that the outside, so tied into a previous question, which is, should you have outside members, or what role can outside members can help to create the boundaries that Naeem sort of spoke about, is that when you do have in-laws or cousins or people trying to come into kind of the conversation in the business, you have the outside members who have no skin in the game as a family member to kind of address the issue and say, look, these are the boundaries. This is what should be done at the family level. This should be done at the board level. This should be done at the business level. And I think that would help in a big way.
Mm-hmm. And a related question here, any advice for dealing with two children wanting to work in the family business, but one having significantly more business acumen than the other? We haven't heard from, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to quickly say, when we established our C-suite that I talked about, we all really took an internal look and had to be self-aware, ask ourselves, what are the needs, hopes, and concerns of this business, and what are our strengths? I thought, well, I put my name forward as the CEO role, just given the experience. And when I explained that to my family, the shareholders got it. When my brother came in and said, I'm going to draft this job description around the chief investment officer because of his life skills and his life experience, the family got it. Likewise for our chief operating officer, and likewise for our chief financial officer.
Mm-hmm. There's another question here that asks, how do you let go of a director during the year? So I imagine this means outside of at the annual meeting. So I wonder if maybe Richard wants to take a crack at that one.
Yeah, it's interesting. A board cannot fire a director. The only way a director can get fired is at the annual meeting, as Alexandra said. So 1 year term is what I recommend. So that if someone goes south on you, you just don't reappoint them. 3 year, 4 year, 5 year terms are that is very risky for a family business. So 1 year term with an evergreen based on your performance and the value that you're adding.
Mm-hmm.
Also say that a chair can probably play a role if there has been a reason for a director to have to be fired midstream and there is a real issue. I guess the chair would have to step in and kind of address any bad behavior if that's really the reason.
That's right.
All board members should be removed.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So you don't recommend a written shareholder resolution?
Heidi, have you ever seen that? The termination of a director in a shareholder? I see. I know what that's referring to. That's referring to.
I was making a bit of a joke there.
Yeah.
That is something that we, of course, saw occur in the
with Rogers. That's very anomalous.
Bit of an odd situation there, given their incorporation in BC and that particular provision of the BC Corporations Act.
Right. I missed that joke.
In all seriousness, though, starting with here's another question. Starting with an advisory board makes a lot of sense for private enterprises. How many external directors are appropriate relative to family member directors? What's an appropriate level of compensation for the external members?
maybe I'll try that. 4, 5, 6 people, and if you can hire the person, they don't belong on your advisory board. And the people on your advisory board will get you to places that you need to go. They will have a deep Rolodex. They will have years of experience. They will be an advocate for you. They will answer questions. They will open doors. In terms of total size, 5, 6, 7, you can have a couple of meetings a year. You can use them on a one-off basis. In terms of compensation, don't be cheap. 50, 60, 70, depending on the size of your company, it could be into the 6 digits. Take it seriously, draft terms of reference, and use them. It's not a ceremonial position. So take it seriously. This is almost like your shadow board. And this could be your talent pool to bring them onto the main fiduciary board in the future.
And I would also say that it's not one size fits all. I would say that I sit on boards where the family is the number of family members is greater than the outside. I sit on other boards where there is only one family member and all outside board members. So it's not a one size fits all. I think it's what works for the family and what resonates with them and what feels comfortable, because success is through comfort of the founders, the shareholders, and kind of customizing their fiduciary board or their board is most important.
And it's so important. Founders sometimes discount the importance of a board because they're so used to making decisions on the fly. But our next gen has realized that just having board meetings is really important. And the ideas and the discussions that can occur in those meetings can really propel the business in ways the founders sometimes don't contemplate.
Mm-hmm. So next question here. Do you think when private companies go public with multi-voting shares, they will or will not suffer a discounted value in the market? It's a great question.
Well, usually at the time of the IPO, that's the only time you can get shareholders to approve it. I mean, it rarely happens where you approve dual class shares once you're listed. So dual class share, normally it's one share, one vote, but dual class voting is permitted in Canada. Many of our public companies have it. It does skew governance a little bit because you owe your position to the shareholder sitting across from the table. But as I said earlier, maintain independence of mind to be a really effective director. Does anyone want to add to that?
So my experience is mainly in private company, but in the situations where some of our clients, I mean, I don't know if it's a good example, but Gildan, who went public, the family controlled the company for many, many years. I think there was an impact on the share value when they let that go. I think that the share price popped. I think there always is because of the points Richard is bringing up as kind of things that might impact sort of governance is family control versus public control and more accountability.
So we're almost at the end here, but we do have a couple of questions that are all a little bit similar. So I'm going to group them together because I think they're kind of a nice spot to end at. And I'll ask each of you to weigh in here. And that is essentially, the business landscape is changing. We see a lot of privately held businesses being sold. What challenges are there around growth for family-owned businesses, and what are going to be some of the major drivers over the next 10 years or so to maximize wealth creation in small businesses? So I wonder if maybe Heidi could kick us off.
Yeah, for sure. I think, again, I think this requires some sort of internalization as well, and in terms of deciding what you want to do and planning for that in terms of your growth, if that's going to be organic and within sort of the company and things that you want to build out, or if you're going to grow by way of acquisition, what that means in terms of the business and those challenges that go along with it, and then really then looking at your business and whether or not you have the scale and are prepared to take that on. For instance, if growing for you means potentially doing something like an IPO, selling yourself, or to the extent that you need, additional capital to grow your business, and that means bringing on, external investors, what are the expectations of those external investors, and are you prepared to sort of accommodate them in what their needs might be? And, this is being, thinking ahead and putting together, are your books and record, as simple as, are your books and records in order, for someone to come in and do due diligence? Do you have, business plans, financial plans, and those things and those ducks in line for someone to come and ask you the hard questions, and you have the ability to answer them and provide backup, for your financial forecasts or what have you. But it really is, being prepared to take that next step if that is sort of the direction that you want to go in.
Naeem?
It's a great question. I can speak, for our firm and our family specifically. And I would just, say, number one is what we don't want to do for entrepreneurs is if you don't have, if the next generation is not passionate about your business, then it's okay to have an exit, because what happens is that if next generation is not passionate about business or doing business, I think equity gets eroded. And because it requires so much time and energy to be a business person or a family business or, work. I just think, for founders that ultimately don't see a path forward with their next generation, that it's okay to maximize value in a market where you can get the best price, because you can impact your family. You can have positive impact with cash, whether it's philanthropy, helping your family, even after you've gone. So from our perspective, we've really asked ourselves, do we want to be in business together as cousins, as brothers, as a family? And if not, we need to start liquidating assets, because we can do different things with cash. So I would just say, from our perspective, what we've decided we're not going to do is run businesses that we are not passionate about, and also check in with each other that we still want to do business together. That looks like a path forward for growth for us.
Tasso?
Sure. So I'm going to pick up on something Naeem's just said, which is really, we're living in an interesting time in Canada where there's been and will continue to be a lot of business transition and also wealth transition. And what I always tell people is that this is not about business transition only. It is about transferring wealth to the next generation, and that wealth can take different forms. It could be, a liquidity event. It could be your business. It could be a combination of both. I think given the where we are in our evolution and kind of that business transition stage, I think there's big opportunity for business owners to acquire businesses if they continue to stay in business and make acquisitions to grow their business as other families are exiting business. I think that's a great way to continue to grow. There's always organic growth. There's about getting, properly structured for that growth. And I always say to people, family businesses are not just business. It's kind of much more complicated than that. It has a lot of different dynamics. And I think but it also creates huge opportunity with the right structure, with the right oversight, with the right way of communicating and building trust and amongst family members. So that's my 2 cents. And I want to leave Richard sort of say the final comments.
Well, we are living in incredible stressful times. We've got interest rates at 5% that are not coming down. We've got 2 regional wars. We're coming out of COVID. We've got artificial intelligence, supply chain risks, geopolitical risks. We've got an election south of the border. We are living in very stressful times. And what good boards are doing is they are really focusing on strategy, forming 75% of the agenda of every single board meeting. I'm also seeing meetings more frequently. I'm seeing the use of virtual technology as well. Boards should not be in denial. They should be thinking up and out. Management is often thinking about the here and now, but boards, quite frankly, are struggling because we've never been through a tumultuous period like this in the last 20 or 25 years. So we are in uncharted waters. But I guess picking up the threads that what everyone is saying is focus on the business and focus on the strategic plan at the majority of your meetings.
Perfect. Unfortunately, that looks like it's all we have time for today. But on behalf of the Globe and Mail, I would like to thank Heidi, Naeem, Tasso, and Richard for joining me today for your thoughtful insights and comments. And I'd also like to thank everyone in the audience for attending and for asking such interesting questions. And of course, thank you to Richter for helping make today's event possible. We will be sharing a link to the recorded webcast in about 1 week. Thank you, everyone, again, and enjoy your day.